Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel and welcome to our best chess games of all time series. So in this series we're following the best chess games that have been ever played in chess history, and today I wanted to show a really cool game played by two legends. It was Mikhail Tal, the magician from Riga, against the bad boy of chess, Bobby Fischer. It was held in 1959 in this very nice candidates tournament that was played, and that Mikhail Tal won. Mikhail Tal won then also the world championship against Mikhail Botvinnik afterwards, so this was maybe really one of the best tournaments that Mikhail Tal has played, and he faced also the legendary Bobby Fischer, destroyed him I think in their match game, because Mikhail Tal won their match game 4-0. But okay, Bobby Fischer was still young. We know that afterwards, back in the 70s, Mikhail Tal couldn't win any games again against Bobby Fischer. Bobby Fischer became really too strong for the world. So back in the 50s, of course, Mikhail Tal was still slightly better than Bobby Fischer. And there was a little bit of tension also in the match game between Bobby Fischer and Mikhail Tal, because Bobby Fischer mentioned that he had better position in all of the games that they both played, but this is probably not wrong to say. In some occasions Bobby Fischer was maybe slightly better in particular positions, but that was simply Mikhail Tal's style. He complicated games because then you have to find, of course, the best moves, and even Magnus Carlsen makes maybe slightly inaccuracies in order to spice up the position sometimes, so that's why we shouldn't evaluate always positions just by these computer engines, or maybe by some great tactical possibilities. Sometimes in human chess it's of course very important to have a good feeling about a particular position. So I think if you when you see this game that I wanted to show today, I'm not sure where is the correct moment in which maybe Bobby Fischer was better than Mikhail Tal. So let's check out the game. We have here now by Mikhail Tal the move d4, knight to f6 by Bobby, and now c4 and g6, which isn't a surprise, of course. Both players were famous by their King's Indian defense, and here we have again the King's Indian. It was very interesting to see for me how Mikhail Tal from White's perspective will handle the King's Indian, because he, as I said, played also himself this very nice opening. And after knight to c3 we have bishop to g7, e4, still common theory, and now d6. After bishop to e2 and castling, knight to f3, we have the classical variation. Now the main idea of blacks, of course, is to crack the position with the move e5. So after d takes e5, I think the game is not so complicated, so that's why you have to keep many pawns on the board. You have to keep also many pieces on the board. Here Mikhail Tal plays the Petrosian variation with the move d5, and the Petrosian is really a tricky opening. I had my troubles to play against the Petrosian. I myself am a King's Indian player. If you want to study maybe more the King's Indian from Black's perspective, you can also check out my King's Indian video series, in which I've showed you 45 videos how to play the King's Indian from Black's perspective. The next couple of moves already surprised me a little bit by Bobby Fischer. He played the move knight to d7. Okay, still you can play the main idea I think in the Petrosian is to play the move a5 and then maybe knight to d7, knight to c5, creating some kind of an outpost here of the knight on c5, cementing the position on the queen side. Then you would have sort of a compact position on the queen side. But here after knight to d7, bishop to g5, this is the main idea of the Petrosian variation. We want to play on the spinning idea, and what we want to do is force black to weaken the pawn structure further in front of the king. So that's why here h6, we have bishop to h4, and g5 wouldn't be so good. It seems like a dangerous move, but after bishop to g3, if we evaluate this position immediately, there is one problem for black already, and it's this blocked pawn structure in the center. So when we have the King's Indian, most of the times you see that White will coordinate the attack on the queen side. That's this directed pawn structure. Of course, the directed pawn structure is always showing us where should we attack. On the other hand, Black is of course trying his attack on the king side with some potential f5 moves. But if you kick away this bishop like this with h6 g5, then I think you have lost a little bit your flexibility with your pawns. Basically, the only pawn move, a good pawn move that you have, is afterwards the move f5. But you would love to have maybe your g6 pawn still, then you have sort of a flexibility to move the pawn somehow further. So that's why I really don't like this h6 g5 ideas. This position can also be cracked with potential h5 moves to really stop the pawn storm that black has created here. So you shouldn't do that here. After the move h6, bishop to h4, and now comes this move a6. So this was a little bit surprise for me, because the main line would be really here to play something like a5, knight to c5. And there is one problem about this move a6. You see, white's idea, as I said, is to crack the position around this square c5. In order to prevent this c5 idea, you would love to play something like knight to c5 to block the position, to block this potential c5 move. But now, as I said, the knight is vulnerable to your attacks. b4 is a white's possibility. So after a6, you cannot again prevent this b4 move, so that's why this a5 idea is much more better, I think. After a5, let's see, maybe a good move, castle here by white, and now after knight to c5, white is basically forced to play the move queen to c2, and now everything is protected. And in order to make something happen here on the queen side, white needs many tempos. For instance, white needs to play the move b3, then a3, maybe rook to b1, and then finally the move b4 in order to crack the position on the queen side. So I think in the Petrosyan, black should try maybe to create sort of a blocking system on the queen side instead of this a6 idea. This a6 idea is Bobby Fischer's idea to prevent some knight to b5 outpost, because Bobby is trying queen to e8 and then get out of the spin and then attack this weak bishop on h4. So because this bishop, although it has sort of a strength, but it could be also an object of black's attack. If the queen gets out of the pin, then the bishop could be attacked maybe by this two knights. So that's why a6, very risky variation, I think, that has been played now by Bobby Fischer. And we have now knight to d2. This is a common idea of white's. The idea behind this move knight to d2 is finally to play the move b4, maybe in some occasions knight to b3, and then this knight to b3 would support further our potential c5 pawn breakthrough, because as I said, if we see this pawn chain, this direction of the attack, we would love to crack the position around this square c5. On the other hand, white would black is trying, of course, to crack the position with potential f5 moves. But you see, this Petrosyan variation is really annoying, because it doesn't allow you to play this f5 move in an early stage of the game. Still, you have to go somewhere with your knight, move the queen first, and then you have the possibility maybe to push the pawn on f5. Queen to e8. So you see, Bobby Fischer is playing on that idea, and we have castling by Mikhail Tal, knight to h7, and we have now b4. I think when we evaluate this position, who is faster, who has attacked much faster, I think white is slightly better here, because now there is maybe the serious threat to finally crack the position around this square c5. In the game, knight to g5 was played by Bobby Fischer. There is one problem. It seems so that you could play maybe on your idea to play finally this move f5, because this is a serious threat. Of course, if white doesn't react, then maybe g5 with f4 is trapping the bishop. But basically, if you try it immediately, you see you cannot still push this pawn on f5. You would love to do it, but it's still not possible. Basically, the move f5 is losing immediately for black. It's unbelievable, because we have e takes f5 after potential g takes f5. Bishop to h5 is here the threat. You don't have good squares for the queen. You see this. That's why I didn't like maybe here this move knight to d7. As I said, the main line was a5, knight to a6, and maybe knight to c5, cementing the knight. Here to the move bishop to h5, you don't have good squares for the queen. You're forced to cover the queen with the rook. So the same thing happens if you take here with the rook. Rook takes f5. Again, a similar idea. Bishop to d3, attacking the rook. And the only way maybe to get something out of this position is to play maybe the rook to h5. But now queen to c2 is a possible move here for white, a counterattack. If you take bishop takes h4, then bishop takes g6 with an attack on the queen. The queen has to move it now. Bishop takes h7. So this is, of course, a comfortable game here for white. White can always play something like bishop to d3, retreating with the bishop, and then maybe to create some kind of a blockade with the move knight to e4, cementing really the position in the center. And I think if we evaluate the strength of these pieces, I've never liked, for instance, in the Petrosyan variations on similar ideas, that this bishop is blocked out. You see this bishop doesn't have a good activity, so this wouldn't be, again, a good position for black. So that's why after the move b4, you see f5, still not possible. Incredible thing. This is for maybe some players who are trying to beat the king's Indian. So you see f5 is not a possibility so far. That's why knight to g5, played by Bobby Fischer, and we have now f3. So this move f3 is, of course, the idea, because black will finally push the pawn on f5, and will try maybe the move f4, or we'll try maybe f takes e4. But at least we have now new activity with our bishop. We can play bishop to f2, which comes now with the support. We can finally crack the position around this square c5. So f5, here we have bishop to f2, queen to e7. So finally Bobby Fischer is activating the pieces, and now rook to c1. Finally, our main goal is, of course, c5, knight to f6, and we have c5. So you don't want to take, of course, because bishop takes c5 loses the rook immediately. So that's why here Bobby Fischer played simply bishop to d7, and now queen to c2. Here you could maybe try, instead of this bishop to d7 idea, you could maybe take here the pawn with f takes e4, but I don't think that it brings you so much, because we can simply take knight takes e4. After knight takes e4, we have f takes e4, and again white is simply faster on the attack, because white has made already progress here on the 5th rank, has challenged now white's pawn on d6, and the problem is this bishop is still blocked out. On the other hand, white's bishops have still a good control all over the board, and there's no way to improve the position of the pieces. You cannot play something like knight to g4, you lose the piece, or if you play something like knight to h5 in order maybe to cement your knight on f4, we can simply take bishop takes h5. So this bishop is blocked out, so in this scenario black is, I think, simply lost. So that's why here after the move c5, bishop to d7 played by Bobby Fischer, and now queen to c2. Mikhail Tal has now finished his development. The rooks are connected, which is an important stage of the game, and we have now knight to h5. Finally, Bobby Fischer has some kind of an attack, because the main threat is here to cement the knight on f4, and now b5. Very, very aggressive move here by Mikhail Tal, cracking the position on the queen side immediately. D takes c5 doesn't bring you so much. It seems that you can grab a pawn, but here b takes a6 is a serious threat, because if you take b takes a6, then you get knight to b3, and you cannot protect anymore the pawn. You lose it. If you play c4, basically you're activating your opponent's bishops, and now bishop to c5 is still a threat. So as I said, white is simply faster on the attack here. I think that's why white has really a comfortable game here. In the game, Bobby Fischer tried f takes e4, finally to open the position somehow in front of white's king, and we have now knight to e4. Again, if you try here like Bobby Fischer, knight takes e4, it's not a problem. Again, Mikhail Tal improves the position of this pawn structure, attacks the knight, and Bobby Fischer is forced here to play the move knight to f4. So okay, you have now a very nice knight outpost. It seems like a dangerous knight, but still white has many defensive resources. Here, these two bishops, this rook, the queen is of course covering this very important g2 square. So that's why here Mikhail Tal simply continues his attack. He's simply faster. After c6, we have queen to g5. If you try something like b takes c6 immediately, then I think we can simply take b takes c6. After queen to g5, we could simply play bishop to g3, covering everything. And if you retreat now with the bishop, I think again that white has a comfortable game, because this is really a weak pawn on c7. We could get use of the b file somehow. We could even place our rook here maybe on b7, even try to sacrifice the rook, but then to get this pawn rolling, maybe to get this pawn on b7, which would be a very powerful pass pawn. So that's why here after move c6, Bobby Fischer tried immediately to counterattack, and now we have bishop to c6, b takes c6, and now d takes c6. So you see Mikhail Tal is trying to open the light squares in front of the king, and now we have bishop to g4. Very nice idea by Bobby Fischer. Of course, what he wants to do is to get rid of this defender and then delivering checkmate on g2. That's why Mikhail Tal simply takes bishop takes g4, and after queen takes g4 we have bishop to e3, a forced move here by Mikhail Tal. Knight to h3 doesn't bring you so much. Okay, you have gained one check, but nothing special. You have to retreat again with the knight to f4. And here, if we evaluate this position immediately, I simply like more white's position, because still this bishop is blocked out by its own pawn, and we have now possibilities maybe to occupy this weak square on d5. So there are these problems on light squares in front of black's king. Still everything is protected. You see, I think white has solved all of these problems in the game. In the game a takes b5 played by Bobby Fischer, we have bishop takes f4. Mikhail Tal gets rid of this very annoying knight on f4. After e takes f4 we have knight to b5, and now we have rook to f7. Maybe a better idea here for Bobby Fischer would have been to play the move f3 immediately, but I'm not sure what will happen after potential knight to c7. Okay, you could maybe take here, or with the pawn maybe deliver some checks, but still I think this is playable for white. Still your rook is hanging on a8, so I think this choice by Mikhail Tal to give up the bishop for a very powerful knight is a good one, because there are not so many pieces that can attack white's king, so that's why it was a very nice positional trade of pieces. After e takes f4, knight to b5, and now rook to f7, protecting the pawn, as I said, and now queen to c4. Very nice move here by Mikhail Tal, pinning the rook, and now we have rook to c8. You have to protect, of course, your c7 pawn, and now rook to f3. Whenever we play against the bishop, it's very important to create a static position, so this is a perfect move here by Mikhail Tal. Now the idea is of course to play rook to f1, and still of course this bishop has a good activity, but there is a problem when you have the bishop on the board. If the bishop is not aiming into something, then it's a bad bishop. You see, this bishop doesn't have a good activity. It would be perfectly fine if the bishop could be placed somewhere on d4, then at least it would attack the king. But now, as I said, this bishop is aiming into air, so that's why I really like more white's position. This knight will always find a way into the game. On the other hand, this bishop is really useless. So bishop to e5, here Bobby Fischer is trying to improve the position of the bishop, and now we have rook to f1, king to g7, and now a4. At least Mikhail Tal in this position has a pass pawn, which is really bothering now Bobby Fischer. He has to make something happen, and here he tried rook to a8, simply attacking the pawn, and now we have king to h1, getting out of this potential g-file mess. Very important defensive move, and we have now queen to g5, which was, I think, the main mistake now in Bobby Fischer's game. Maybe a better idea is here to play queen to c8, getting another defender in front of here on the queen side, because then white cannot march on with his pawn, and white could try maybe to play the move g3, which seems like a natural move, but I think we can solve all of our positional problems with the move g5, because if you try to open the position with g takes f4, then rook takes f4, rook takes, and now bishop takes f4. Okay, white could make maybe one check or two, but still I think this is defendable. Black has maybe solved all of the positional problems. This knight is also very hard for this knight to somehow to come now into the game, and now maybe we could attack also this a4 weakness. I think it's an equal position in this particular one, but here in the game Bobby Fischer made really a mistake. He played the move queen to g5. The mistake is that basically you cannot protect anymore this f4 pawn with your g5 pawn. That's the problem about this position, because now we have the move g3 and you cannot advance the pawn on g5. This was really bad mistake here by Bobby Fischer. After the move rook to f8, here after g takes f4 we have bishop takes f4. If you take rook takes f4, here Mikhail Tal has prepared really some dangerous tactics on Bobby Fischer. Then you get knight takes c7. That's the main tactical threat. It seems that white is losing the rook, but now you get knight to e6, you have to move the king, and now rook takes f3. It's game over. Whatever you do, the problem is you cannot play check here on c1, as the queen is covering this very important square, so you have to retreat with the queen, or you lose the queen or the rook, so it would be game over. So great tactics that Mikhail Tal has prepared here against Bobby. So you see, you cannot take with the rook. That's the main problem, because you lose simply this very important c7 pawn. So that's why Bobby has to play bishop takes f4, and now knight to d4. You see now this e6 square is very, very weak in the game. Queen to h4 was played, rook takes f4, sacrificing the rook, rook takes, and now knight to e6. We have king to h8, and now queen to d4. Very, very nice move here by Mikhail Tal. You have to cover with one of these rooks. If you move the king simply, then you get checkmated on g7. So you have to play with one rook, from the 8th rank to f6. The same thing happen if you play something like rook to f6 here. Then we can simply take knight takes f8. Again, you cannot move the rook. The problem is you cannot also play some checks. It's basically game over. So that's why after the move queen to d4, rook to f6 was played, and now finally knight takes f4. Here Mikhail Tal really grabbed the piece. Now there is also this threat to play knight to d5 and simply taking this rook. So that's why king to h7 here played by Bobby Fischer, and now d4 e5, very important to protect our knight. And after d takes e5, we have queen to d7, and in this position Bobby Fischer resigned. So whatever you do, king to g8, here you get queen to d8. If you move the king here to g7, then you get a very, very nice move, knight to e6. If you take, you lose the queen. The same thing happens if you try king to h7 here, then you get first a check. So simply a lost position here for Bobby. So as I said, after the move queen to d7, Bobby Fischer resigns. So great game, I think, in the King's Indian. Very, very nice attack by Mikhail Tal. First, really, he solved these positional problems on the king side, attacked the queen side very, very fast. So it was really this opposite side attack game that we love in the King's Indian. Here, Mikhail Tal showed really his great attacking skills. He won the match game 4-0 against Bobby Fischer, which was basically an incredible result. But as I said, back in the 70s, then Bobby Fischer got his revenge, basically. After that, Mikhail Tal was never able to win a game against Bobby Fischer. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I enjoyed it a lot. Meanwhile, you can watch my other best chess games of all time that I've analyzed so far. Here's the link, and you can also watch my best chess games played by computers with some Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, Stockfish games, and many, many more. And you can also subscribe to my channel if you like this content. Thanks you for watching, guys, and chess is the best, of course.